The relationship between men and mental health has often been called a silent crisis. On this podcast, we're breaking the silence. Welcome to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Here's your host, Allan Kehler.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. On today's show, we have a motivational speaker, an addictions counselor, a poet. Yes, a poet. My good friend, Brad Siroski. Brad, welcome
Allan,
to the show.
how are you today?
They say living the dream. I'm well. You?
I am well also.
Brad, how is it? How is this going to go down with two people who struggle with ADD? This is going to be wild.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to not fidget too much in my seat or just get up and leave the frame altogether. So it could be an interesting podcast. If I disappear and you can still hear my voice, just remind me to come back to my chair, I guess.
Okay, will do. Well, hey, let's just dive right in. 22-year history with addiction. I mean, that is intense. And I'm curious, at what point, Brad, did you realize that there was a real loss of control around your alcohol and drug use?
You know, I always say it became inherently apparent that I had a problem when I was waking up every day with a bottle of vodka, but I really honestly have to back things up a little bit. I think it should have been apparent to me anyways that I had a real problem, probably right around the 18, 19-year-old mark. The year that I graduated from school, there was a plethora, I guess, of things that happened that year that kind of should have kind of made me go, oh yeah, there's a little bit of an issue here, right? So I was kicked out of the secondary school that I entered. I was kicked out of my first home. I received 2 impaired charges that year. I went to jail due to those impaired charges, and also was given my first trip to treatment. I went to my first treatment center, and I remember the addictions counselor there said to me, she said, "You've got a problem with alcohol." It was kind of an interesting story. There was a test that you had to do back in those days, and I don't know if I haven't seen it since I started working as an addictions counselor, but I seen it lots back then, and there was 20 questions, and if you answered more than 5 with yes, then you were considered to be an alcoholic or a problem drinker, I think is what they called it back then. And I remember I got 20 out of 20. I remember joking with my buddies, like, it's the first test I ever got 100% on. And I wore it like a badge of courage. I really did. To me, it was just bad luck back then. I didn't have a drinking problem. And that's really common with addicts, the denial piece, right? I have this under control. And I struggled with that all the time. My friends still say to me, like, why don't you just come out for 3 or 4 drinks? And I say, I can't, because I won't come home for 3 or 4 months, right? Like that's just the way it is with me. I have a problem, and it showed up over and over and over again in my life. When I really started to pay attention was when I said, like, I started to notice it was a problem when I woke up every day with a bottle of vodka, because I really was drinking every morning, and excessively. Like, I would drink 13, 14 ounces of booze just to get myself to work every day.
Yeah, and you mentioned denial. Denial is a comfortable place to live. There is a significant difference between acknowledgement and acceptance, isn't there? I mean, no doubt, as we've talked before, you could acknowledge that there was a problem, but to accept it usually requires action. And Brad, I just want to share a story from what you wrote in Mental Health It's Time to Talk that for me really speaks about the power of addiction. This is what you said. It's a very short excerpt. You said, on February 2nd, 2009, my beautiful daughter, Kiera, entered the world. I gently held my precious girl in my arms for the first time, and she fell asleep. I stared at this beautiful soul in complete awe. Tears flowed freely, and I beamed with pride. My heart was full, overflowing with a love I could never have imagined. Time stood still as I held her. I looked at Kiera and made her a promise. I am going to be the dad you deserve. I will never use drugs again. And were you able to keep that promise?
No, I'm pretty sure that the next line in the book reads, and 8 hours later, I was using cocaine off a CD case in the parking lot of the Royal University Hospital. And I mean, addiction is it's hard. It's hands down the hardest thing I ever went through. I went through leading up to that. I remember I was trying so hard to sober up because I wanted to be this amazing dad, and I would have these moments of sobriety, 7 days, 14 days, sometimes up to a month, and then I would fail, and there was this stigma and it still kind of, I still see it a lot with the clients I have nowadays, that you could be sober for 60 days and fail for one day, and clients often think, well, I've failed, I've completely lost, now I should, and then they'll carry on using for like months, weeks, whatever at a time. And I always say to them, like, if you had $99 and you lost one, would you throw the other 99 away? Like, but that was that stigma that was around it. Like, I'd fail, and then after I failed, after 7 days, I'd fail, I'd relapse, I'd use, and then I would feel this hopelessness, this uselessness, and I just continually felt that every time I failed, it got worse and worse. And then when you fail and you feel terrible, the only thing that's going to make you better in your mind is that drug. And that's the same way when I found myself in that hospital parking lot using cocaine. That was it to me. That I'm like, if I can't get sober for this girl after this happened at this juncture in my life, there's no hope. And I just basically gave up. That was it. I just basically gave up on it, Al.
Yeah, the cycle of shame, hey? And the thing is, you mentioned stigma, Brad, and there's a lot of people who would read a story like that. And the question becomes, why the hell would you choose, in quotation marks, why would you choose drugs over your own daughter? Now, that right there is a lot of the problem, isn't it? That word choice. How is it that you can explain to people why an individual would essentially make that decision?
Well, I think at that point, Al, I had, it wasn't a choice thing. There was so many other things that came into play there. There was obviously the mental piece, the actual like biological piece behind it, of your brain being hijacked by this drug. There was that. There was, like you said, the feeling of shame and hopelessness, that it was never going to get better. So why should I bother quitting? There was that. And then on top of it all, I think many people, like you and I have had this conversation before, lots of people use because of past traumas. They're covering something up, right? So I didn't really choose to become, I didn't, like, I think I've actually heard you say this before, and many other people, like, I didn't graduate from high school and go, what do I want to do with my life? I want to be a drug addict. That's not, I didn't choose to do that. And when you begin, it's hard to explain to people who have never been through that cycle of addiction, the way you feel when you're in it, the way your body's hijacked, your brain's hijacked, your soul, your emotions, all that stuff. You just begin to feel so much shame, so hopeless, so useless, so worthless, so terrible of a person, that you feel like there's no way out, that this is it. This is all you've got left for the rest of your life. And as you can see right now from me and from you, that's just simply not true.
Yeah. It's like, it kind of feels like breathing, right? If you hold your breath, eventually you're going to breathe. Why? Because it's a need, not a want. And I know for myself, in our conversations and working with other people who struggle with addictions, it's that sense of powerlessness. It's like, you don't want to repeat that behavior, but you find yourself instinctively doing that because at some level, the prefrontal cortex is kind of gone offline, and we just get into that autopilot. But I also hear from what you're saying is it's not really so much an alcohol problem as perhaps a living problem. Yes?
Absolutely. I mean, there was so many things that I went through in my life, that at that point in time, and shame was a big one at that point in time. that was a huge thing for me. How I was failing my daughter, how I was failing the relationship I was in at that time. I was stealing from my partner the money that was supposed to put a roof over our head, pay for my daughter's formula, all that kind of stuff. There was that shame piece, but there was also so many other things I went through on the way there. That I went through a lot of anxiety and depression and stuff when I was a child, and all that stuff kept rearing its ugly head. And the best way for me to forget about that stuff was to bury myself in addictions.
Yeah, exactly. That's just it. It is logical to want to leave behind a life of pain in exchange for pleasure, right?
Absolutely.
And really, I feel like a lot of people who struggle with addictions, there's unresolved pain. You're trying to put a blanket over some kind of pain. And yet you mentioned the word hopeless, but you were able to turn the corner. How is it that you were able to somehow end that 22-year battle with addictions and find a new way to live?
I've heard this term used a lot too, Allan, and it sums up where I was at. I came to the end of myself, really. And what that looked like was I just, so much stuff had happened in the year prior and the years leading up to that. And I was starting to lose my family members. I truly believe my sisters were afraid to have me around their children because I was intoxicated all the time. I had stolen, lied, did everything terrible under the sun that you could do to my parents. I was physically unhealthy. I was having seizures. I broke all my teeth off. I did all this. It was terrible. Like, I was on the verge of losing a job. And then the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was I was supposed to pick my daughter up, and I missed an appointment, and her mom had enough. She said, like, I'm scared. When you show up here, I can smell alcohol on you. There just became so many. She said, I can't have our daughter be around you anymore. I'm going to file for sole custody. And I say over and over again, I share in my presentations, it was like somebody punched me as hard as they could right in the center of my chest and ripped my heart out. And I said, this is it. Like, I had a heart to heart with myself that day. And I said, if I can't do this now, then I'm never going to do this. And it was either choose to live or choose to die. Those were the two options. It really was. And I chose to live. I went to detox one last time, and a lot of this stuff is people have heard me say before, but I talked to a couple people in the detox. I talked to Jack, who has passed away since then, bless his soul. And he said to me, what do you want to do with your life? And I told him I wanted his job, and he said, go do it. And I talked to Heather, who's now my boss, because she was the manager there at the time. And she said, get your shit together. And that kind of really lit the fire under my ass. And then I entered a recovery program, and it's Teen Challenge program. I truthfully say over and over again, this program saved my life. And then from there, I just kind of started putting together things that worked for me, Al. Recovery is, I'm doing a 11-part series right now called The Long Road of Recovery, not to recovery, because I don't think there's an end point for recovery. You're constantly living it. And in that series that I'm doing, there's 10 things that have worked for me since I started to recover. And some of those are forgiveness, dealing with past traumas, self-care, scheduling your life, making sure your days are full, so you're not thinking about addictions right off the hop all the time, stuff like that. So it's been a long road, but it's not over yet. So, but I love every day this sober life. And I think that's the most important. If you can't be happy being sober, then it's probably not going to work for you.
You say it well, and it is definitely a process, not an event. Now, the interesting thing, Brad, is after you left Teen Challenge, you went back to the community where you were using before, right? And living in a smaller community can kind of be like a fishbowl where everybody kind of knows what's going on. And when you were later diagnosed with cancer, early into your recovery, I know that you have shared that there's a significant difference by the way that people reacted or responded to the cancer diagnosis versus when you were struggling with addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before I even start this conversation, I just want to make sure that I make something perfectly clear. My battle with cancer was not the same as any other person's battle with cancer. My battle with addiction is not the same with any other people's battles with addiction. So when I get on here and speak I'm only speaking about myself. Right now, I have friends in the last year that have passed away from cancer. I have a family member right now currently that's dealing with cancer. Cancer is a terrible thing. I'm sharing my experience with cancer, not anybody else's. And I wanted to make that perfectly clear, just like I'm sharing my experience with addiction, not anyone else's. And I wanted to make that kind of perfectly clear before I started. So there was no people saying, well, some people go through, and I know what people are going through. I'm living with some of those people right now, and my heart goes out to those people. So I just wanted to make that kind of clear before I started. But back to the question at hand, when I lived in this community, this small town that I lived in, when I was struggling with addiction, I definitely don't want to paint a terrible picture of this town, because I received amazing support. But I also had people that would walk across the street to get away from me when they see me because of what I was going through. Not necessarily because they're bad people, mostly because they didn't understand addiction. They didn't know what to say to you if they came up to you. That, there was people on the other hand that talked a lot behind my back, but they would rather talk behind your back than help you. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, it seemed like it was the exact opposite, Al. It was like everybody was there to support me. People I didn't know, people that probably didn't like me all that much, were dropping gift baskets off on my front step. And it made me wonder why the head turning and the walking across the streets when it comes to addiction, and why the outreach and the huge amount of support when going through cancer.
What is it, Brad, that you feel you needed from the community when you were struggling with addiction?
I think I put on the Facebook page to advertise this podcast, I said, I often reached out to people when I was struggling with addictions, and there was nobody there to grab my hand. And all I needed when I was struggling with both things is someone to grab my hand and to connect with me, to support me, and to say, you know what, we're here. We're here no matter what you're going through. We're here without any stigmas, without any judging, without any kind of bad thoughts or any of that thing. We just want to help you. I just wanted that support and connection with people. It truly was a support thing. I just wanted people to be there if I needed them.
Yeah. Wendy says it perfectly. She's chiming in here with a comment. She says, we need to be willing to have hard and awkward and difficult conversations instead of crossing the street. Now, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have to be that awkward, right? Maybe it doesn't have to be that difficult of a conversation. You said it before, you wanted support. I mean, we all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. Judgment is useless. I know that as a motivational speaker, you're very passionate about shedding light and bringing awareness to the topic of addictions. What are some of the things that you want people to understand about those who struggle with addiction?
I mean, the most important thing is that we're all human. We're all cut from the same cloth. And so many people talk about not walking a mile in a person's shoes before you judge them. And I think that's so important. None of us know what anyone else is going through. I did the best I could for my whole entire life to hide traumas, to hide things that I'd went through, because I was told as a young boy, you don't talk about that stuff. You don't share feelings. You don't cry. You man up. And I think that it's so important to just remember we don't know what people are going through, and to just look, just to love on everyone equally. That's something I took out of Teen Challenge. It was when I went there was no judgment there. I walked into a place and it didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter if you were upper class, lower class, you came from corrections, you came from the gutter. It didn't matter. When you got there, you were welcomed into that place with a hug and no judgment. And I don't care what anybody says. That is the first step to recovery right there. If somebody can reach out to you, give you that hug and say, listen, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. talk to me. Talk to me. Let me know what's going on. What can I do for you? Even if it's just sit quietly, even if it's just be here in the same room as me. It's so important. And I'm not talking about just addictions. I'm talking about mental health. I'm talking about people who are struggling with suicidal tendencies and stuff like that. Sometimes they just need someone to sit next to them, just so they know there's someone there.
Yeah, connection. Connection, that's such an integral role, a key word when it comes to addiction. I mean, if we are not connected with ourselves, if we cannot look within, it is much easier to look outside of self, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, I think too, I said, I put at another time, Johann Hari says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection, right? And I think I'd take that one step farther and say the opposite of hopelessness and despair and shame is actually connection. It doesn't have to be addiction. As you know, I see it so often in the field I work in. Addiction and mental health issues walk hand in hand. Primarily, there's every single person who's struggling with addiction has some story that you don't know, that you haven't heard, that's hard for them to bring out. It's hard for them to talk about it. It was hard for me to put a voice to my pain, but I realized when I started putting a voice to it that, that was one of the biggest healing processes, like one of the biggest healing parts of my journey was talking, using my voice.
Totally. I mean, talking really facilitates healing. There's a lot of people who have a lot of darkness trapped within. My definition of healing is pretty simple. It's the more that you can get the darkness out, the more room there's going to be for light. Now, as a man, and you talked about this before, some of those scripts, don't talk about your pain, don't show weakness, you don't ask for help. How is it that you were able to navigate through some of those old scripts, rewrite them, and now as a father, instill some of those healthier behaviors in your daughter?
Well, the navigating through that stuff part, I truthfully tell everybody, give yourself a chance to heal, start talking, start sharing, because until I started feeling vulnerable and crying and expressing my emotions and talking to other people, and I always say, you don't have to have a big group. You just need one. And if you don't have one, call me, I'll be that one. So until I started sharing with people and really dealing with the stuff that I had went through, I couldn't be a better person. I couldn't be a good father to my daughter without doing that. And now what I've instilled in my daughter is this open line of communication. There was not an open line of communication between me and my father. There was not. It wasn't even where I came from. It wasn't even really kind of heard of. You were this tough farmer kid. Your dad was tough. You didn't talk about, you fall down, rub some dirt in it, like get up and get going. So I had to change myself completely. I cried for 3 weeks straight at the Teen Challenge program, and that's where my healing began. And I talk to my daughter about everything that I can. I tell her about my addictions. I tell her about my mental health struggles. My daughter suffers a little with some anxiety pieces. So we talk through that stuff. And I tell her how important it is to talk, to share this, whether it's with dad or mom or a school counselor if you don't feel comfortable with mom and dad. But that's the thing that's changed now, is that I wasn't told that it was okay to share my feelings. I was told you keep them inside. And I tell my daughter, cry. If it hurts, cry. Whether it's physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, whatever, cry about it. It does that. What's the shame in that? It's getting the toxins out. I tell my daughter that all the time. And that's what's changed between, and I mean, if we can all start to do this, then you're going to see more people healing. And that's what's changed is just that. That's how I keep those open lines of communication open with my kid.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. I mean, elders always remind us tears are medicine,
Absolutely.
And I've seen you speak a few times, and what I love is that you allow yourself or give yourself permission to be vulnerable. And if you cry, you embrace it. You don't run from it. And what I love is it then therefore gives others permission to do the same. I mean, I think like the one time, Brad, that I saw you speak, we were helping to launch the Saskatchewan online mental health course. And what I take away from that is when I could see you sharing a message and crying, I thought to myself, what would that have done for me if when I was in high school, I saw a man up there cry, be vulnerable, right? It's like I said before, it's just rewriting some of that, and vulnerability breeds vulnerability.
Yeah, it's that breaking of that stigma. Like it truly is. Like, this goes back to everything that I've kind of based my public speaking career on. I seen this huge stigma, and it wasn't just around, like we talked about the addictions versus cancer thing. It wasn't that stigma just around that. It was this whole stigma around how men handled recovery versus how women handled recovery. And you've put some stats up before that I've seen about the men's suicide rate compared to the women's suicide rate. And that's because there's this stupid stigma. And I tell my kids, don't use the word stupid. It's not nice, but there is. It's a ridiculous stigma around this whole, like, it's not okay to cry. That whole rub some dirt in it. That whole keep everything inside till you absolutely explode. It doesn't do anyone any good. It's toxic. And that's what I think it's so important for us to, as men, to get out there. And I don't care. I go speak in front of high school kids all the time. I shed tears all the time. And when I go home, I think, you know what? Feel no shame about that. Feel pride, because that is going to help those young men heal. They're going to be able to, and women, of course, but I'm talking more primarily about men here, but it's going to help those boys realize it's okay. They don't have to rub dirt in it. They don't have to jam it all inside. They can share their emotions with people.
Yeah. And when you look back, Brad, at where you were, where you are, especially when it comes to the people that you choose to surround yourself with, how has that changed? I mean, when you look at some of the people you surround yourself with through that 22-year of addiction, and the life that you've created now, how would you explain the difference?
Well, I mean, when you're in addiction, you surround yourself with people that are, like you talked about, dark and light, right? Like I surrounded myself with a lot of dark people, and I surrounded myself with those people because they could either A, help me get the drugs that I wanted, or B, were using the drugs with me, or, C, were okay with me using the drugs. I surrounded myself with a lot of bad people. And when I cleaned myself up, the first thing that I did was I realized, and this is probably one of the toughest things that my clients go through on a regular basis, is reinventing themselves. And I don't like to use the word trimming the fat, but getting rid of the toxic parts of their life. So I had to get rid of friends that were no good to me. And I started surrounding myself. Well, you're a direct, like, you're the direct product of the 6 to 8 people that you surround yourself with. So if you surround yourself with shitty people, you're going to be a shitty person. It really comes down to that. I'm sorry, but it's true. And that's what I started doing. I started surrounding myself with positive energy, positive people, looking into what made me better holistically, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, and just bringing positivity and cutting out the negativity, throwing that crap out. So I don't even know if I answered your question.
Well, actually, I don't even remember my question. But it totally has to do with like that crab in the bucket mentality as well, doesn't it? When you decide to make that decision to leave behind that life of destruction, of addiction, everybody who we leave behind, it's like they need to bring us back down into their world, because we're just mirrors. And when they see us trying to achieve a healthy life, that's intimidating. That means that then they have to look at themselves and look at some of their pain. They want the courage that you have, but they can't quite grab it. So it's easier to bring you down. But obviously, you have arrived at a place where you have surrounded yourself with people who lift you up, who support you. Community is a massive part of that. And I know that, for everybody listening right now, if it's the podcast version, we're also streaming live. And one of the streams is at We Connect SK through Facebook. And community is essential. You said it before, we were not meant to fight these battles alone.
Absolutely. I can't express enough how much community and connection. When I moved back to Davidson, we touched on this a little bit before. When I moved back to Davidson, once I'd sobered up, once I finished the Teen Challenge program, there was just so many people there that supported me. The support before the program, I just want to back up to this for 1 minute, because this is so important in people's recovery. I remember when I reached the end of myself, when I told you that day I got my heart ripped out, it was a day or two later. I was still drinking excessively, but I knew I needed to change. I knew I needed to fix this. And I reached out, and there was this company I was working for called Panther Industries in Davidson. And the boss there had actually taken me into his house before and helped me with my detox. They supported me all the times I was in the detox center and gave me my job after I came out. And I phoned this one guy named John that went through the Teen Challenge program. And I remember I said to him, "Hey man, I'm going to go to the Teen Challenge program." And he's like, "Okay, give me a few minutes." And I thought he would call me back. And 15 minutes later, he showed up in my apartment with the registration for Teen Challenge. There was support, and community is so important in this whole recovery thing. And your community can be your hometown. It can be the few people that support you, like your addictions counselor, your few sober friends, whatever. But it is so important to connect with your community, however that looks for you. Like I said, it looks different for everyone. I had great support in Davidson. I had great support through my family. I've got an amazing group of friends. I seen Adam, and a couple of them are watching the podcast and commenting. I have so many people that supported me, that picked me up, that came to my apartment, lifted me up off the ground, cleaned my apartment while I was throwing up into a toilet, were there for me when I needed them. So you can't do it without connection and community. I don't think you can.
And I know for you, Brad, you have taken this upon yourself to create connection and community amongst men. Pre-COVID, you were running a support group for men. First of all, I'm curious, what was one of the most common challenges that you saw men faced before they even entered into that space? Because that's hard to do, to be that vulnerable. What was the biggest challenge for the men initially?
It was exactly what you just said, Al. It was not being able to be vulnerable, to share their stories, to share what was bothering them. It was that, I especially seen it when you got in large groups of men, where all of a sudden they puffed up their chest and flexed their muscles, and I don't need to talk about this. I'm tougher than that. You're a pussy if you talk about this, all this other stuff. And it was, but you'd get them once they kind of got into their comfort zone and realized that we were all there for the same reason. And it took one or two. It took me and my good friend Jesse, who was facilitating the groups with us, to start opening up ourselves and showing them that it was okay to talk about some of the pain that we went through, to talk about, I cried in a lot of those groups. And once those men seen that and realized, hey, this is a safe place, I feel safe, I can talk here. Once they did that, that vulnerability started to show, and they started to share, and they started to heal. That was it. That was the biggest part of it, was getting past that. I'm a man. I don't share. I'm tough. I don't show my emotions. That was really it that I noticed in the men's group.
That is a beautiful thing to witness, isn't it? I mean, when you can see a man go to that place of vulnerability, give themselves permission to feel, because as we know, obviously feeling leads to healing. And then what do you hear from men after they have given themselves that permission to be vulnerable? How do they then feel?
Well, just to add to the part about the beautiful thing about seeing men come forward and be vulnerable and share that, the other second part, amazing part of that is watching the other group of men that I was sitting with come around those people and lift those men up and just say, you know what, man, we're so proud of you. It took a lot of guts to say that. I think some of the toughest people I've ever met are not people that can throw fists, but people that can share. It's so true. And these guys are coming from street level. These guys, a lot of these guys are ex-gang members, and you didn't share that kind of shit when you were in a gang. You'd get stomped out. But they'd come to this table and they would share that, and these other men around them would lift them up and say, man, you gave me the power to share. And then those guys would come to me after, and they would say, you know, thank you. Thanks for providing me with this safe place. Thanks for letting me know that it's okay to share my feelings. You know, it's an amazing thing to sit in those groups, Al. It really is.
Yeah. And the fear is real, you know, to be vulnerable, to walk through those doors. But it's like, if you can just get yourself into those spaces, wow, the power is very hard to describe. And you talk about really redefining what it means to be strong. And we see so many men who are just in so much pain. They don't have the tools to manage the pain. And so they project. But then there's that beautiful line where hurt people until someone is strong enough to look at that pain, right? And that's often what we see unfold in front of our eyes when people do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had many of the guys come in and like say to me after the groups, I want to punch you in the face. You know, they're not at that point yet.
Right.
I'm not sharing shit with you.
Right.
You know, and then they keep coming back, you know, and you can tell somebody wants to heal when they keep coming back, and they won't say nothing. They'll be quiet and their arms are crossed and they're mad. And it's like, I'm not sharing shit. And then eventually one day they do. And it's hands down one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, Al. It's you instantly see a change in this person. You do. And it doesn't mean that they get it, that they've got it all figured out, that they're going to be sober right after that, any of that stuff. But it means that they're starting to unpack all that shit. They're starting that long journey of recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true. I remember I had this one male client at an inpatient treatment center who was about to put the phone through the glass. And I said, oh, hey, now, you want to talk? And, you know, he paced and talked for probably 40 minutes until he finally sat down. And then it came out, and he shared how his aunt had just passed away, who was like a mom. And then the tears came. But anger is often that secondary emotion. If we can get past that and look at what lies beneath, then we're moving the right way. And that's the gift, Brad, that you create for so many men. You said it, create this space where they feel safe enough to look at some of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm privileged. I consider myself lucky. Every time I go into one of those groups, I learn as much, I heal as much, I take as much out of it. I'm just there to facilitate. The groups that I run there's no slideshows. There's none of this. There's about 10 questions put on the board, and you talk about the question that hits home with you, and you share your feelings if you want to, and you don't. And I was lucky enough in my job to be able to be given the opportunity to be paid to do something that's so fantastic. I honestly consider myself blessed.
Yeah, me too, Brad. Me too. I know that there are a lot of people. I bet probably once a week I get an email asking if there's a support group in whichever community. The thing that I'm seeing, and I saw this a lot pre-COVID, a lot of the communities that I travel to, they were starting to gather as men and create exactly what you're saying. And I'm curious, you know, do you have plans of creating a support group? I know a lot of people listening right now are in the Saskatoon area, but do you personally have plans of creating that, or possibly an online support group, or where are you at with that?
You know, I've always give some thought. So obviously the way things are going with COVID, unfortunately, my men's groups that I was facilitating through my job, are not up and running right now. I hope that they're back up and running soon. And that's all I can really kind of talk about with that. But I mean, you and I have talked about this in the past as well. I've given a lot of thought to facilitating a men's group. It's kind of that whole what I can't even remember, the if you book them they will come, the whole field of dreams type of thing, where maybe if I found a space, that was somebody was willing to offer up some space where I could put a group together. And because I mean, truthfully, for me, I have no problem volunteering the time one night a week to do a men's group and to have people come, and how it would look would be kind of come up as it went. But I mean, if there was a space and there was the interest, which I'm sure there would be, I would gladly like facilitate, co-facilitate, help organize, whatever. I mean, my recovery was basically a bunch of people supported me, people like counselors, people at detox, people at treatment centers, all these family members, friends, all these people supported me and helped me get to where I'm at now. And to me, it's beyond importance to make sure that that's paid forward. So there could definitely be something post-COVID for sure in the works.
So how then would people get in touch with you if they had any questions for you, Brad, or just wanted to get some more information, or even I know that there's a book of poetry in the works.
Yeah, it's actually finished, and the second one is in the works, and the first one is called Some Rhyme, Some Reason, All Heart, and it's kind of a collection of poetry, a mishmash, I guess is the good word, over the years, through addictions, post addictions, pre-addictions. I've got some stuff that I wrote when I was 16, 17 years old. And the next one I want to do is going to be called 2 Years in Hell. And it's going to talk about the last 2 years of my addictions. And that's well in the works as well. I think I've got 20 pieces already written for that. So I'm super excited about that. I do have my own, my online page. It's bradsiroski.com. It's a strikingly page that's, explains everything that I do, web page, and you can check me out there, or you can hit me up on Facebook or my email address, I guess. So, which I guess.
What is your email address, Brad?
It is Brad_Siroski at hotmail.ca. Make sure you get the CA part. It throws a lot of people for a loop. So once again, Brad_Siroski, SIROSKI at hotmail.ca.
Beautiful.
Online under bradsiroski.com. A little selfless plug there. So,
but it's a continuation of support. And I mean, I know you personally, and I know that you take the time to respond to people. And I know that there's a lot of people who are just really struggling right now. So it's a continuation. We are also part of something that's launching. It's WeSask. Well, I think it's WeConnectSask.com, and it's just an online community that Darren Anderson saw a need for through Love My Mind. And I think at this point in time, Brad, there's probably 17 people, but it just speaks to the need that we don't have to fight this by ourselves. Whatever you're struggling with anything, if you're in Saskatchewan, I would really personally recommend checking out at WeConnect SK on Facebook. But whatever you're struggling with, I mean, you and I know this, the resources are everywhere, but you have to take the time and have the courage to access it.
Yeah. And I think, well, what I've seen with this WeConnect group is that there's so many people that just want to help. So a lot of things, and this is honestly a really important thing, I think, for anybody that's struggling with addictions, mental health, any of that stuff, is taking it upon yourself to take that first step, kind of lighting a fire under your own ass, so to speak. So getting yourself out there and having a look, because there is so many great options. And the other thing is if you think you can help and you want to volunteer, then look into places like WeConnect. Give me a call and say, hey, I actually had a very good friend of mine reach out not too long ago and say, listen, I've got a huge desire to help people out. What can I do? Made a few phone calls, made a few connections, and now they're starting their own things. So you can always either find help or help people. if you just have the desire to do it.
Brad, you say it well. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights. I am so proud of you. I'm proud of the man that you've become. I'm very excited to see where you take life. And yeah, be well, my friend.
Al, thanks. You've been such a huge support to me over the years, and I'm glad to call you a fantastic friend. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
You're welcome. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to tune in to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Take care and be well.